Hey everyone, welcome back to the Thought Experiment. In today's video, we're diving into one of the most fascinating and controversial topics in modern science, cloning. What exactly is cloning and how does it work? What are the different types and why are they important? And finally, human cloning. Let's break it down. So let's start with the basics. Cloning is the process of creating an organism that is genetically identical to another. This can happen naturally, like identical twins, or through artificial means in the lab. Scientifically, the most common method of artificial cloning is something called somatic cell nuclear transfer. That's a fancy term, but it's pretty simple when you break it down. In essence, scientists take a body cell, like a skin or muscle cell, from the organism they want to clone. Then, they place the nucleus of that cell into an egg that's been emptied of its own nucleus. This egg now has all the DNA of the original organism and starts developing just like a normal embryo. Now, there are two main types of cloning you might have heard of: reproductive cloning and therapeutic cloning. Let's break them down. First up, reproductive cloning. This is what you probably think of when you hear the word cloning. It's when scientists create a full, living organism that is genetically identical to another. Remember Dolly the sheep? Dolly was the first mammal to be cloned, and her birth back in 1996 made headlines around the world. Reproductive cloning is often controversial because it involves creating a living being that's genetically identical to another, which raises questions about identity, ethics, and potential harm to the clone. On the flip side, we have therapeutic cloning, also known as somatic cell nuclear transfer for research purposes. Therapeutic cloning is focused on creating cells or tissues, not complete organisms. The goal is often to generate stem cells for research or to treat diseases. These stem cells have the potential to develop into any type of cell, like heart cells or nerve cells, which could one day help cure conditions like Parkinson's or diabetes. The important thing about therapeutic cloning is that the embryo typically doesn't develop into a full organism. It's meant to be used for research and medical advancements. So why does cloning matter? Well, reproductive cloning could help us study genetic diseases and help with agriculture, while therapeutic cloning could open doors to groundbreaking medical treatments and even organ regeneration. Cloning, especially therapeutic cloning, could revolutionize medicine by offering the potential to grow healthy organs, treat diseases more effectively, and possibly even repair damaged tissues in the body. Now let's look at the fascinating history of cloning. Let's start with one of the most famous names in cloning history, Dolly the sheep. In 1996, scientists at the Roslin Institute in Scotland shocked the world by cloning the first mammal from an adult cell. Dolly wasn't born through traditional reproduction. Instead, she was created using a technique called somatic cell nuclear transfer. Her birth proved that it was possible to clone a mammal from an adult cell, which had never been done before. This was a huge milestone in genetics and biotechnology, but it also sparked a heated debate. While some saw Dolly's creation as a major scientific achievement, others raised concerns about the ethics of cloning and the potential consequences. Could this technology be used to clone humans? Would clones have rights? Could they be healthy, or would there be dangerous side effects? Despite these concerns, Dolly lived a relatively normal life, but sadly, she passed away in 2003 at the age of 6, much younger than the average lifespan of a sheep. Her passing raised additional questions about the long-term health of clones, as Dolly had developed certain health issues, such as arthritis, which some believe were linked to the cloning process. While Dolly's birth was exciting, it also raised complex ethical dilemmas that still exist today. Could cloning lead to genetic engineering, or the creation of designer babies? Would clones be treated as second-class citizens, or would they have equal rights? Many religious and moral groups were quick to voice their opposition to cloning, arguing that it crossed a line in tampering with life itself. Others, however, supported the research for its potential in areas like medicine, such as producing organs for transplants. Fast forward to today, and cloning has come a long way since Dolly. While reproductive cloning of humans is still banned in many places, significant advancements have been made in cloning for medical research and regenerative medicine. In fact, scientists have made huge strides in therapeutic cloning. In recent years, researchers have been able to clone human cells with much more precision, creating induced pluripotent stem cells, or iPSCs. These cells have the ability to become any type of cell in the body, which could one day be used to regenerate damaged tissues or even grow organs for transplants, without the risk of immune rejection. Another breakthrough involves cloning endangered species. Scientists are experimenting with cloning animals like the black-footed ferret to help preserve species on the brink of extinction. While this technology is still in its early stages, it could play a key role in saving species that might otherwise be lost forever. The science behind cloning holds great promise, especially in medicine. For example, therapeutic cloning, where cells are harvested from clones for research or organ regeneration, could revolutionize treatments for diseases like cancer, heart failure, and even genetic disorders. Imagine being able to grow a perfectly matched organ for a transplant, eliminating the risk of rejection. It could save thousands of lives every year, and the potential for curing genetic diseases is staggering. Cloning technology could allow us to replace faulty genes, potentially eradicating inherited conditions. But with these advancements come ethical dilemmas. Would it be right to create clones solely for medical purposes, like organ harvesting? Would a clone's life be valued only for its biological resources? These questions could lead to major ethical debates. Cloning for medical research also raises the issue of consent. A clone, especially one created specifically for organ harvesting, might not have the same rights as a naturally born person. Would they be seen as a person with autonomy or merely a vessel for body parts? Another concern is the genetic engineering side of therapeutic cloning. What if this technology is misused to create genetically modified humans, or even to design designer babies? How far is too far when it comes to altering the human genome? On the one hand, cloning could be an absolute game changer for medicine, offering solutions to some of our most challenging health issues. On the other hand, it could open up a Pandora's box of ethical and moral issues that we're not fully prepared to deal with. Regulation would be key in managing cloning's role in medical research. If done right, it could enhance lives. But if it's misused or left unregulated, it could lead to exploitation, inequality, and unforeseen consequences. Even with all the advancements, the ethical dilemmas surrounding cloning remain as relevant as ever. While therapeutic cloning holds promise for treating diseases and saving lives, reproductive cloning continues to stir controversy. First off, let's tackle the big question. Would a clone be considered the same person? After all, cloning involves creating a genetically identical organism. But it's more than just DNA. There's also personality, memories, and experiences that make us who we are. A clone might share the same genetic material, but they won't necessarily have the same experiences, memories, or emotions. That means while they may look like the original person, they would likely develop their own individuality. Now this leads us to a deeper question. What rights would a clone have? Would they be treated as their own person, or would they always be seen as a copy? Could a clone's autonomy be compromised if society treats them as less than human? Ethical concerns like these are at the heart of the cloning debate. If clones are seen as less than human, they could face discrimination, exploitation, or even a lack of legal rights. Next up, let's talk about reproductive cloning, which involves cloning a human for the purpose of creating a new individual. The idea might sound exciting in some ways, but it raises a lot of risks and moral dilemmas. One of the main risks of reproductive cloning is health problems. Clones like Dolly the sheep had health complications, and there's concern that clones may have shortened lifespans, genetic diseases, or developmental issues. Beyond that, there are moral concerns about identity. Imagine if a child was cloned from an adult. What would their sense of self be like? Would they always be compared to the person they were cloned from? Would they feel like they are living in someone else's shadow? And what about society's impact? Would cloning humans lead to the commodification of life, where people are created for specific purposes, like replacing lost loved ones or fulfilling societal expectations? Now, let's shift gears and look at therapeutic cloning, which is often referred to as cloning for medical purposes. Specifically, scientists have proposed using cloning to grow organs for transplants, a process that could save countless lives. While the medical benefits are undeniable, this brings up major ethical concerns. Is it moral to create an organism for the sole purpose of harvesting its organs? Even if it's only embryos or stem cells, there are questions about whether that life has value and rights. Another question is, what happens if the clone becomes sentient? If scientists were able to create a fully developed clone just for organs, would that individual ever have the ability to develop their own consciousness and desires? Creating life with the primary goal of using it for organs crosses a significant ethical line for many. Is it okay to sacrifice one life to save others, or does that devalue life itself? Now we're diving into some of the deeper, more philosophical and moral questions surrounding cloning. Can a clone ever truly be you? Is it right to play God by creating life? And what about consent? Can a clone give it? Let's start with the question at the heart of cloning. Can a clone ever replicate the unique experiences, memories, and personality of a person? Sure, a clone might look exactly like you, even share the same genetic makeup. But does that mean it's really you? Cloning involves duplicating someone's DNA. But what makes each of us truly unique isn't just our genetic code. It's our experiences, the moments that shape our personality, and the memories we build throughout our lives. While a clone might have the same potential for growth, their life story would be completely different. The clone might not have the same interests, sense of humor, or even worldview, even if they are genetically identical. In a way, they would have their own self, even if it started out from you. So while a clone is physically you, they would never truly be you. They would be a completely separate individual, living their own life and shaping their own identity. Now, let's move on to a more controversial topic: playing God. Many people argue that cloning crosses a moral line because it involves humans trying to control life in ways that nature never intended. Religious groups, in particular, have raised objections to cloning. In many faiths, there's a belief that only a higher power, like God, should have the ability to create life. Cloning, they argue, disrupts the natural process and gives humans too much power over life and death. But it's not just religious perspectives. Philosophers also raise concerns about our ability to manipulate life. If we're able to clone people, we could potentially reshape human existence in ways that might be harmful, emotionally, socially, and psychologically. Cloning might be seen as an attempt to exert too much control over life, and that control could come with unintended consequences, altering not only individuals but entire societies. Next, let's talk about consent. One of the most disturbing ethical dilemmas surrounding cloning is whether it's even ethical to bring a clone into existence in the first place. Can a clone give consent? Would it be right to create life when that life can't choose to exist? When a clone is created, they have no say in the matter. They are brought into the world by someone else's decision. If we're talking about human cloning, that raises a huge moral question. Is it ethical to create a life without asking the individual if they want to be created at all? Consent is a cornerstone of ethics. In medicine, research, and even in day-to-day life, the ability to give consent is vital. But if we're talking about cloning, the clone can never give consent because they didn't choose to be born in the first place. This lack of choice is a major concern for many ethicists. The clone is created solely for the desires or intentions of someone else, whether it's for organ harvesting, replacing a loved one, or just for recreating a life. But beyond the individual consent, who decides the fate of the clone once they're created? Is it ethical for one person to create another with the full knowledge that the clone didn't ask to be born? In a society where cloning could become a reality, the implications could be vast. Would clones be given the same rights as humans? Would they be treated as second-class citizens? Or would they be seen as mere tools for the benefit of the original person? Alright, let's ask the big question. Would I clone myself? Honestly, I've thought about it a lot. On the one hand, there are some cool perks to having a clone. For one, I could have a constant companion who shares all my interests, someone who gets me on a deep level. Imagine always having a buddy to hang out with. No need to make small talk, just someone who's you, but maybe with a slightly different perspective. But then, on the other hand, I also think about the downsides. The pressure would be insane. Imagine being a clone and always being compared to the original. There's a lot of weight that comes with living up to someone else's life and expectations. People might expect the clone to be exactly like the original person. Same skills, same personality, same everything. That kind of pressure could really mess with someone's identity. Could you imagine always feeling like you're living in someone else's shadow? So, while the idea of a companion sounds great, the psychological burden on the clone would be a lot to handle. Would they have a chance to become their own person? Or would they just be the copy forever? Now, let's talk about the practical concerns of cloning. If I had a clone, their life would probably look very different from mine. Even though they'd share my DNA, the environment, people, and experiences they'd go through would shape them into a different person. They might end up being totally different, not because they're not me, but because they didn't go through the same experiences I did. And while that sounds like it could be a good thing, it could also lead to some awkward situations, like feeling alienated or misunderstood by others who expect them to be just like you. Then there's the question of societal stigma. Would people treat a clone differently? Would they see them as less than, or just a copy of someone else? We already struggle with the idea of identical twins, so imagine a clone who's an exact replica of you. On top of that, the clone might always feel pressure to succeed in the same way I did, whether that's in my career, relationships, or even just being me, and that could lead to some serious identity issues. Let's ask a big question. What would it feel like to be a clone? Imagine being a living, breathing copy of someone else. No matter how much you might look like them or share their genetic makeup, would you still feel like your own person? One of the biggest psychological challenges for a clone would likely be a sense of identity. Even though clones share the same genetic material as the original person, they aren't the same person. They're their own individual, with their own experiences, memories, and thoughts. But would it be hard to accept that? Would a clone constantly be reminded that they're just a copy? A clone might struggle with the fact that they didn't get to choose their own identity or existence. They didn't have the chance to form themselves naturally, and every decision they make could be overshadowed by the fact that they were created for a specific purpose. Imagine the internal conflict. Am I my own person, or am I just a reflection of someone else's life? This could lead to serious identity crises, where the clone might feel a sense of detachment from their true self. Now, let's talk about the social and emotional effects. How would the world perceive a clone? Would people see them as their own person, or would they always be viewed as a copy, or even a second chance? The societal pressure on a clone could be intense. Imagine the expectations placed on them to live up to the achievements or life choices of the original person. Would they always be compared to their source? This could create emotional strain and feelings of inadequacy. Social stigma could also be a big issue. People might not know how to interact with a clone, and this could lead to the clone feeling like an outsider. Would they be accepted as a fully equal member of society, or would they be seen as less than because they didn't come into existence the traditional way? Let's also talk about relationships. How would it affect a clone's ability to form deep, meaningful connections with others? Would people ever be able to look at the clone as a unique individual, or would they always view them as a replica of someone else? Relationships could be complicated. A clone might fear that people only like them because of their connection to the original person, rather than for who they are. This could cause deep emotional issues, like a fear of rejection or feelings of being unwanted for their own traits. So how might a clone cope with these challenges? Self-esteem could be a huge factor here. If the clone feels like they'll never be seen as an individual, their self-worth might take a hit. A clone might develop coping mechanisms to protect their emotional health. For example, they could focus on carving out a niche or career that's uniquely their own. They might even decide to embrace their differences and challenge society's view of them as just a copy. Therapy or support from others might also play a crucial role in helping a clone navigate their emotional struggles. If they can find people who see them for who they are, beyond their origins, they might be able to build confidence and self-worth. Ultimately, the psychological impact of being a clone would be a complex journey. While the genetic link to another person might create challenges around identity, self-worth, and societal acceptance, it's important to remember that every person, whether cloned or not, has the potential to be their own unique individual. A clone would have the same ability as anyone else to create a meaningful life, form relationships, and define who they are. It would just take time, support, and the courage to embrace their true self apart from anyone they were copied from. So, the big question: would a clone have the same rights as a non-cloned human? It's an interesting and complicated issue. After all, clones would be genetically identical to their originals. But does that mean they're exactly the same person? Or would they be seen as separate individuals? Most of us would agree that every person deserves basic human rights. But what if a clone isn't seen as fully human by society? The challenge here is that a clone could face a form of discrimination or have their rights questioned, simply because of how they were created. In terms of legal rights, we'd expect that a clone should have the same fundamental rights, things like the right to life, liberty, and freedom from harm. But legally recognizing a clone as a full person could be complicated. Some people might argue that, because they were created rather than born naturally, their autonomy could be compromised. Let's think about autonomy for a moment. Autonomy is the right to make decisions about your own life. But if a clone was created for a specific purpose, such as for organ harvesting or for scientific study, would they have full autonomy, or would their purpose limit their freedom and rights? Some argue that the very act of creating a clone for a specific purpose, such as for medical needs, could violate their right to autonomy. If clones are created with predetermined roles, their ability to make choices for themselves could be undermined. Now let's tackle the ethical issue of creating a clone for a specific purpose. One of the most debated uses for cloning is for medical purposes, particularly organ harvesting. The idea would be to grow a clone to have genetically identical organs that could be used to save the life of the original person. But here's the issue. Is it ethical to create life solely for the purpose of harvesting organs? Some argue that this would reduce the clone to a mere tool, stripping away their humanity in favor of fulfilling someone else's needs. Others believe that creating a clone for organ harvesting is justifiable if the clone is treated ethically. In this view, as long as the clone is given rights and treated as an individual with autonomy, the medical benefits could outweigh the ethical concerns. But the real question is, can we ever treat a clone as an equal when their creation was based on another person's needs? In many ways, this raises the question of whether it's ever acceptable to create life with the express intention of using that life for another's gain. Should we ever create a sentient being, knowing their purpose is to serve someone else? Beyond organ harvesting, there are other ways cloning could be used for purpose-based life creation. For example, reproductive cloning could be used to bring a child into the world with the intention of continuing the family line or filling the emotional void left by the death of an original person. This raises even deeper ethical concerns. Is it ethical to bring a child into the world with the expectation that they will serve a particular role, whether it's to inherit family traits or to be better than the original person in some way? Creating life with a specific purpose could severely limit the freedom of the individual. A clone, in this case, might grow up constantly feeling the weight of expectations. Would they ever truly have the chance to be themselves, free from the shadow of the life they were meant to continue or replace? So what's the solution? If cloning becomes a reality, we will need to ensure that clones are given the same rights and autonomy as any other person. That means protecting their freedom of choice and preventing them from being created solely for utilitarian purposes like organ harvesting or emotional fulfillment. It's also critical that we consider the emotional and social well-being of clones. They should not be seen as replacements or tools, but as individuals who deserve the same respect, freedom, and opportunities as any other human. Ultimately, the ethics of cloning come down to how we value life, autonomy, and equality. If we treat clones as full human beings, deserving of their own rights and respect, we can begin to navigate these complex issues in a more compassionate and ethical way. Thank you for joining me today, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more thought-provoking discussions. Until next time, stay curious and thoughtful.